I know many of you who have already come to visit us here in France often say French people are so rude. And I find that such an interesting observation because, in fact, there's a whole series of rules that govern French good behavior.
Just about everything. French people, it must be said, don't have the reputation of being the most polite people in the world, but it's pretty paradoxical because they are quite obsessed with etiquette and savoir-vivre, living and behaving the right way. So it doesn't really fit this image that we have that French people can be so rude. In the perfect French world, there's actually a network of unsaid rules that governs just about everything, even the most mundane things like how to answer the telephone and also how to say hello. Take a listen. Saying hello in France can be an obstacle course. First of all, it depends on the time of the day. Anytime before 6 p.m., you say bonjour, bonjour, bonjour. And after 6 p.m., you say bonsoir, bonsoir, bonsoir. Now, that might sound incredibly easy, but it's not. It's actually quite tricky. And if it weren't, though, it wouldn't be any fun. An important thing to remember is you have to say bonjour whenever you interact with anybody, especially in a shop or in a cafe. Now, you can't just say, excuse me, you have to say bonjour, or the person might get offended and seriously ignore you. Now, things can get tricky when several people are involved, like in an elevator. When you walk into an elevator, you have to say hello to everyone, or people will secretly judge you. And a special word for tourists. When you're asking for directions, make sure you make the effort to say bonjour in French first. Don't just start speaking English like, where's the Eiffel Tower? Now, you see, this sounds like nails on a chalkboard for French people because you're in France, but you're not even making the effort to speak French. You see, bonjour is the one magic word you need to learn when you come to France, and it might just be the way into French people's hearts.
And a special shout out to our very own Molly Hall playing the perfect French person, even though she's not French.
She's got the eye roll perfectly done.
Now, whether or not French people really are etiquette experts is up for debate, but one thing is sure, the French certainly invented the word.
They did, and it's not a total shocker, but the English word etiquette comes from the French word étiquette, which comes from the old French word estiquette, which is a word for label, ticket. So how did the meaning change? How did it go from label to the conventional requirements of social behavior? Well, scholars believe that it happened at the royal court. And in fact, there were small cards or tickets that were printed, estiquettes, with instructions for how to behave properly. Now, France's obsession with etiquette took a little bit of a nosedive after the revolution, and then it made a little bit of a comeback in the 19th century with the rise of the bourgeoisie, and then came crashing down again after the First World War. But it's having a little bit of a comeback now. These days, a majority of French people say that being polite is a real asset and something that they want to teach their children.
One area that can be particularly tricky to navigate for the French are table manners, particularly when you're invited to a dinner party.
That's right, Jeannie. Now let's pretend that the studio is a dinner party and this table here is a dinner table. There are some universal rules. For instance, you should never put your elbows on the table. You chew with your mouth closed. You don't pick your teeth. These are universal rules, but there are some French particularities. For instance, if you're invited to a dinner party, never arrive on time. Always leave the hostess a little bit of time for that last-minute panic, usually about 15 minutes, and always come with a gift. Also, never say bon appétit, and this is a surprising one because even some French people don't know this rule, but traditionally it was impolite to say bon appétit, though these days it's changed a little bit and a lot of people do say bon appétit. Also, wait until everyone is served before you start eating. That's an important one. And also, don't eat with your hands. You always use your knife and your fork for everything, even shrimp, hamburgers, pizza. You have to use your knife and fork. It can be a little bit tricky, but you get used to it. The only thing that you can touch with your hands is bread. And when you never cut bread, you break bread in France.
It took me years to figure out how to take off the shell of a shrimp with a fork and knife, but I did do it, so it is possible. Another question, Flo. What are you supposed to do with your hands? On the table, under the table?
Both hands on the table, Jeannie, and actually there's a historic reason to this. The idea was that you always wanted to be able to see what your rival was doing with his or her hands so they couldn't stab you under the table or caress a member of your family. So hands where you can see them. Now, other rules are, for instance, you should always refill someone's glass before you refill your own glass, and when clinking glasses, there's some very specific rules. First of all, you never cross glasses. That's bad luck. And you always look the person in the eye. If you don't, they get 7 years of bad luck. So be very careful and look them in the eye.
7 years of bad luck is a very long time. French etiquette is full of so many little twists and turns and things like this. You actually had some people who wrote in with some of their own questions.
There were lots of questions about French etiquette because it is such a minefield. For instance, Delin Vale Sigard wanted to know about talking to strangers. Do French people talk to strangers? Well, it's not really a thing in general in France, particularly in Paris and in the north. It's a little bit different in the south where people are a little bit warmer. But in most of France, people see talking to strangers as something that's nosy, and so it's not really done. Kimberly Thomason had another interesting question. She said, why does it take 30 minutes to say hello to everyone and have a little discussion at the beginning of the day? Now, in my experience, this is actually more true for when you say goodbye. For instance, when you leave a dinner party, you have to say goodbye to each and every person, and you can't just ghost. You can't just disappear from a dinner party. You really have to take the time to say goodbye to everyone.
Now, that's interesting because I find that saying hello is very complicated. There's the shaking of the hands, there's the kissing, the bees, but we'll get into all of that in an upcoming French Connections. In the meantime, I'm going to say thank you to you, Flo.
Thanks, Jean.
And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to tweet them to Flo at Flo Villemaneau.